That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
The British Constitution provides that taxation and representation shall go together. Therefore, women taxpayers are entitled to vote.
I have a dream today. Let freedom ring, and if America is to be a great nation, this must become true.
Hello, and welcome to episode 38 of Only Human. Today we're going to talk about a topic that is certain to be controversial, something called mindful noncompliance. Mindful noncompliance. The concept comes from George Duros, who's a safety expert as well as being a medical doctor in Australia. And he basically says this is a quote: "In a complex system, because mindful compliance doesn't work, you have to be mindfully non-compliant." It's certainly an interesting perspective. And today we're going to dive deep into it and see what it actually means. And we're going to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly around this idea of whether or not we should become mindfully non-compliant. Uncompromising compliance is often cited as like a bedrock of high reliability organizations. And on a recent podcast, my last one, as a matter of fact, when we were on with Elmar Lutar, this idea of mindful noncompliance came up. And frankly, it's been profoundly disturbing me ever since. You know, I've said before, who we are is where we were when, how we were molded, who our mentors were, what cultural factors shaped us in our formative years. And so as a B-1 bomber pilot, I grew up in two cultures, the aviation culture, which compliance is huge, and the culture around nuclear weapons, where it's even huger, right? I was molded into this mindset of General George Patton, that there's only one kind of discipline, perfect discipline. Right? So this idea of mindful noncompliance, you can see why it disturbs me. But you know what? I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I might not even be the smartest guy in the room, and I'm alone. So that's saying something. So I thought I needed to bring this out to you all to see what I might be missing. And I've done a little bit of digging and a little bit of reading and research over the past week on this topic. And I think, like with any profound question, I think this is one of the more profound questions in human factors. Do we have to always follow the rules? If not, why not, right? So let's begin with the why. What is it that makes us feel the need to be non-compliant? I can think of a bunch of questions. Is it because the end justifies the means? Right? If I do this now outside the lines, it will be so much better for my company, my coworkers, my personal reputation, whatever it is, right? Does the end justify the means? Or maybe it's something different. Maybe we feel we can do the job actually better outside the lines that are currently written, right? We know a better way. And so why wouldn't we do that? Would that be mindful noncompliance? Would it be justifiable? Right? Or maybe it's just that we've seen a lot of folks that we admire and respect being non-compliant, right? So is it mindfully non-compliant to follow the herd that we perceive to be smarter, more experienced than we are, right? Maybe we feel our level of knowledge and judgment and our proximity to the challenges that we're facing, maybe those are reasons that the regulators or the rule writers could never have anticipated when they wrote the rule. There are many, many really good questions. And I think understanding the why behind noncompliance is critical if we can even begin to have any acceptance of this notion of mindful noncompliance. You see, it seems to me that if we're talking about mindful noncompliance, there's got to be some other kind, right? Unmindful noncompliance. I've studied compliance for many, many years. And I know there's multiple reasons people don't comply. Everything from just wanting to stick it to the man, arrogance and ego that thinks maybe I know better than the rule writers, going along with the crowd, like we mentioned, mission pressures to get the job done. And what I worry about a lot is if we're going to accept this idea of mindful noncompliance, that we build some sideboards in that don't allow the emotional side of our brain to override the logical side of our brain, right? So, what they say in the 1960s, if it feels good, do it. We've got to avoid that, right? Because that's not the mindful side of our brain we're looking for. We're looking for the coldly logical side. Excuse me, not the emotional side. So, if we take this idea that maybe we can be mindfully non-compliant, it's really important to consider the various factors that surround this to ensure our actions are deliberate, thoughtful, ethically and morally sound, right? And we're going to jump in at the deep end on all of this after just 1 minute for a word from our sponsor.
So, you need some IA refresher credit, huh? We've all been there. Which one are you doing this time? The one with a 4-hour video hosted by a boring nerd? Or the one with a 50-page workbook printed on cheap paper? Wait a minute. What's this? The Aviation Maintenance Never Events is a brand new approach to preventing the 7 most common and most costly accidents that happen on the hangar floor. Watch videos that demonstrate the topic, learn while staying engaged with multiple interactive sections in each lesson, and dive into case studies that explore the depth and breadth of each of the 7 never events. So visit our website or give us a call to discover the power of a program that people are calling as big a leap forward in maintainer safety and training as simulators were for pilots.
Join us on our website at convergentperformance.com and click the link for e-learning to sign up for this exciting program today.
Welcome back. So what can we do to perhaps give this idea a little bit more of a chance than I'm really willing to give it right now? How can we be acceptance of this idea of mindful noncompliance? For ourselves, it's much easier than if we said everybody around us, right? Because most of our systems are built on the assumed compliance of everybody around us, right? If an air traffic controller and a pilot were both non-compliant at the same time, what does that do? Is it 1 + 1, or is it some sort of multiplication of the two? I mean, all of these concepts, we need to take in consideration that if it's good for us, it may well be good for others. And so as we want to shape our cultures, and we know the value of compliance, what are the sideboards? What are the guidelines that we want to put in people's minds around this concept of mindful noncompliance? And I'll start where I always love to start, with ethical considerations. Is it morally justified for you to break the rules in this given situation? We could come up with 100 examples, but let's take a common one. We work in some sort of production-related organization, and we need to produce X number of widgets in X amount of time, or it's going to drag down the entire team, maybe the entire organization. The customer will be mad, right? So at that point, the question becomes, is it ethical and moral for us to take a shortcut? And there's further questions down the line from there. Yeah, will it impact safety? Will it impact quality? And if we can say no to both of those questions, no, it won't impact safety. No, it won't impact quality. And we're pretty sure of it. We're deep enough into the knowledge of whatever it is we're doing to know that what we're contemplating, this mindful noncompliance, is not going to jeopardize safety or quality. Then maybe we move forward one step and we ask the next question. what's going to be the impact on somebody else, right? Is anybody going to take a cue from me on this? How will it affect more junior colleagues? What will my subordinates think of me if I greenlight this non-compliant action? What if someone else found out after the fact? Right? So I think the point there, moral justification, impact on others, is that if we can think our way through those and we have aimed to minimize any negative impacts on innocent parties, I'm kind of okay with moving forward from an ethical standpoint, right? So beyond ethics, what else do we need to consider? I think the second thing is legal and professional risk, right? What's the ramification of breaking a rule for all the right reasons and being found out, right? What are the legal consequences? Could I be fired? Could this be something even criminal, right? If it has to do with, for example, the airworthiness of an aircraft, out of my world, certainly there have been criminal cases brought around noncompliance there. So what are the risks and liabilities of our actions? And to a lesser extent, what are the professional consequences, right? What's the impact on my career? Disciplinary actions, damage to my reputation, future employment prospects. All those things are things that we should be thinking about. Okay, so we've thought about those. And no, we're pretty sure that we could explain this. As I said last week, I was given a bit of wisdom early on in my career that said, if you decide to non-comply, make sure you can clearly articulate and explain it to a judge, a jury, and if necessary, a next of kin. And I've always thought that that's a pretty good set of sideboards. So let's jump down to a couple of other things we might want to think about. Do we want to communicate this in any way? Is this something we're keeping secret, right? So if we're keeping it a secret, we already know we're doing something wrong, right? Maybe it's wrong with a capital W, maybe it's wrong with a lowercase w, but we're doing something that we prefer not to be found out by others. If that's the case, you're already feeling a little bit guilty. So that bothers me a little bit. That might be a tick on the negative side, right? The con for this idea of mindful noncompliance. So can you be transparent about it, though? If you can communicate openly with relevant stakeholders about your reasons for noncompliance, you may be able to garner support and understanding. I remember a long time ago, I was flying with a student of mine. I remember him very well. His name was Todd Westheiser. Brilliant, great kid. His call sign was the Shrine. That's how good he was. Everybody knew from the very beginning this guy was destined for greatness. And we had to do something, a maneuver that it wasn't dangerous, but you had to be in the right gross weight in the aircraft. This was in the B-1 bomber. I was an instructor. He was my student. You had to be the right gross weight. You had to have certain qualification as an instructor, which I had. You had to have good weather. And the whole thing was to get you into this little region of buffet so you could experience something called high-speed buffet. You had to be very careful when you were doing it with auto terrain following on, because if you experienced it and the airplane decided to do what's called a fly up, where it just gets you away from the ground because it senses something's wrong, it could tip you past the point of being able to control the aircraft. So probably too much explanation there. But I had to get one more training event done, and that was it. It was his last scheduled flight. The weather was good. What we didn't have, we were a little over the gross weight. And so I explained it to him. I said, Todd, here's what I want to do. I want to get you the high-speed buffet demo. If we get into any sort of fly up or anything associated with that, I will toggle it off, quickly take manual control of the aircraft. There'll be no risk whatsoever. Are you good with us moving forward, right? So here was the instructor asking the student to second guess his wisdom and judgment. And he was a little bit pensive at the moment. He came back and said, yeah, no, okay, let's go ahead and get it done. So we got it done. And we came back, and during the debrief, he said, that really disturbed me that you were willing to bend the rules just because you didn't want to take another sortie. Right? I've never forgotten it. That was 25 or 30 years ago. But at least I was attempting to be transparent and explaining what I was doing, right? So communication, I think, is important. Looking back, do I wish I had not done it? Yes, right? Yes, I do wish I had not done it. Probably the next big area that I'd like to kind of maybe build a sideboard around is your personal readiness to do this, right? Sometimes we don't like to follow the rules because we don't really know enough about the rule and what it's designed to prevent, right? We aren't the regulators. We're not the original equipment manufacturers. We're not our organizational bigwigs that are writing these rules for a given purpose. And while it may seem very overly restrictive to us, it may well be that way because there's something we don't understand about the bigger reason why behind the rules. So that's why I say your personal preparedness or readiness for it should begin with this idea that you don't know everything about why that rule was created, right? And so mindful noncompliance is often viewed as something that's done in the moment, right? We're up against this circumstance, the rule doesn't apply precisely. If we were able to bend it, there's no such thing as bending a rule, right? You break it. If we were being able to break it, we could get this stuff done. I see no danger, blah, blah, blah. Some of you remember the movie Top Gun, the original one, where Commander Heatherly goes below the hard deck and Maverick's trying to explain. He says, I had Commander Heatherly in my sights. He went below the hard deck. I was only below the hard deck for a few seconds. I had the shot. I took it. And that's when Viper, the commander, comes back and says, something like these rules are here for a reason, son. They are not flexible. Neither am I. Right? And that's the world I grew up in. So I think this idea of your personal readiness must begin with this assumption you don't know everything about the rule, why it was written, why it's in place, everything else it protects you from. Right? And all the way back to the Blue Threat Proverb of the week, where we said, noncompliance is progressive and addictive. Right? You do it once, you're going to be tempted to do it again. So part of your readiness needs to be think it through, right? Think it through. Don't do it on the spur of the moment, which leads us to our next area that I want to discuss briefly. And you can tell there are so many nuances here. We will discuss this further as we move forward in the series, but timing and execution of mindful noncompliance. Once you're level-headed on this, right? It's not emotional. You know as much as you can possibly know about the rule. You have to really choose the right moment to apply this concept, right? Timing can significantly impact the effectiveness and consequences of your actions. For example, if you violate a rule and it doesn't go as you thought, right? I thought if I just bent this rule or broke this rule for a moment, I'd be back inside the lines, everything else would be good. And all of a sudden, no, I'm out here in no man's land where I no longer have the guidance of a checklist, a work plan, a workflow, the support of my colleagues, whatever it is. And now I'm out here in an unknown spot, right? So you want to time any decision to be mindfully non-compliant to give you enough time to recover from anything that could result from your so-called mindful non-compliance. And in that moment, when you're executing, your non-compliant solution, right? Be prepared to be surprised and avoid impulsive decisions based on that surprise. Here's what tends to happen a lot of times when people get outside the lines. They're outside the lines and they only plan to be outside of one line for a short period of time. I'm just going to do a quick inspection of this. I know it's supposed to take me an hour, but I only have about 10 minutes. I'm going to do a quick inspection. I'm going to look for the really important stuff, and that's it, right? And then all of a sudden, something else happens, right? You identify a discrepancy, or even worse, it works and you get it done in 10 minutes instead of the hour. Back to the subtext of the Blue Threat Proverb. Many years ago, I was interviewing a captain for a major airline. It was part of his exit interview. He'd just been let go for landing out of an unstable approach, and he drug an engine pod on the ground, did severe damage. It wasn't the first time that he had done it. He had actually been counseled on landing out of unstable approaches before. And he said this quote, he said, "The first time I did it, it was out of necessity. I was low on fuel, the weather was bad, and I got unstable, but I salvaged it and we landed safely. First time was out of necessity. The second time it was out of convenience. And then it just became a habit that I couldn't break." And so that's why we say compliance is progressive, and it also can be addictive. So we've kind of just tried to put some thoughts around readiness and timing and communication and legal risk, professional risk, ethical, moral situations. But let's see if we can kind of bring this back into the center with a few sideboards. I think the first thing you need to decide when you're contemplating mindful noncompliance is how far you're willing to go, right? Is this a one-time, only this time thing, or will it become your new norm? The whole concept out there, proven concept, of normalization of deviance is extremely powerful, right? Once you violate, will you be tempted to violate in this way or other ways? Again, especially if you're successful. So first sideboard, how far are you willing to go? That's a great question. The second sideboard is this only benefiting me personally, right? If the answer to that is yes, then you should get rid of that idea. If it's benefiting you, your team, the customer, the world, the Lord, whatever it is, and you can see no downside as you ripple through the potential consequences left and right of your decision, okay, I think that's a reasonable opportunity to say I might move forward here. The third thing is, it has to do with adaptation and reflection after a successful act of mindful noncompliance, right? If the rule wasn't good enough for this time, there will be another time and another person that faces the same challenge you just faced. So what is it that you do following a successful act of mindful noncompliance? Do you share it, right? Or are you hiding it, right? Do you share what you learned? Do you volunteer to help write a new procedure, right? Do you try to get rid of the old procedure in lieu of a principle-based approach? And we've talked a little bit about principle-based management, where there's fewer rules and more general intent, right? Relies on a highly experienced workforce and thoughtful people to execute under that, but it definitely enhances innovation. And in many cases, you reduce noncompliance because you aren't so rule-bound with everything. So those are the kinds of things that happen when you reflect on a single act of mindful noncompliance and are willing to help ripple it out into the rest of the world. So I think the last piece of this that I want to cover down on this podcast, and we'll we'll certainly go deeper into this with a guest or two in the future, is this idea of learning and growth, right? We all come up against these situations, right? We're running behind getting our kid to school or getting to some event, and so we break the speed limit, we roll through stop signs, right? What do we learn from that? Do we learn to leave earlier, or do we learn that we can leave later and because there's no consequences to those speed limits and stop signs, right? So learning the right lessons from any active mindful noncompliance, I think, is essential. And it's essential that we get our egos out of the way, that we don't assume that what we got away with this time, we can get away with every time. And we don't assume that we're not having a negative impact by influencing others to be noncompliant as well. So I think I want to wrap it up there. We'll kind of go back over just a couple of the main themes here today. Mindful noncompliance is a pretty controversial thing, at least for me. I think it's a very dangerous thing for the masses to adopt. I think it's something that if we are going to get behind here at Only Human, it's got to be with the people who are the thinkers and the doers, the people that will think their way through some of these things, get back engaged in order to remove a procedure, change a procedure, adapt a procedure, provide some training around decision-making and judgment. All of those things I think are going to be really important. Only by considering these factors, in Tony's humble opinion, can we approach noncompliance in a way that's deliberate, thoughtful, and ethically sound. Balancing the need to understand why rules exist and principles exist with the realities of our professional and our legal environments, all mapped against the challenge we play every day trying to get the job done. So here's my homework for this week. If this has intrigued you at all, like it has me, please send me an email or just hit a comment on any of the places you find the podcast. My email, by the way, is tony@convergentperformance.com. To give me your thoughts and your opinions on this and any questions that you might want us to explore in the future. Until then, I'm still a pretty compliant guy. My mind hasn't been changed, but it's been opened just a little bit. Keep doing what you're doing, getting better every day with the resources at hand, and I'll see you soon.